The plate hit the wall, shattering into jagged pieces that scattered across the floor. Tola froze, her hands trembling as Kunle's angry voice echoed through the small house. Hidden in the shadows of the hallway, young Deji clutched his sketchpad, his small frame shaking. He couldn't understand why his father was so angry or why his mother always seemed to shrink in his presence. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, please hit that subscribe button and join us for more deeply emotional and captivating tales. Don't miss stories that move your heart and stir your soul. Let's continue. The Omole family lived in a modest three-bedroom house on the outskirts of Abuja. Kunle was a respected accountant, known for his punctuality and stern demeanor at work. But at home, his temper flared unpredictably, leaving Tola to bear the brunt of his frustrations. Tola, a quiet and nurturing woman, managed the household with patience, constantly smoothing over Kunle's outbursts. Their 7-year-old son, Deji, was a quiet and artistic child who preferred sketching scenes from his imagination to playing with other kids. To outsiders, they seemed like a typical family, but the walls of their home hid years of suppressed tension. Kunle's voice often rose during dinner over minor issues, and Tola's soft responses did little to calm him. Deji had grown used to hearing muffled arguments from his room, but he didn't understand why his father was always angry or why his mother rarely smiled when Kunle was home. It was a humid evening, and the smell of freshly cooked jollof rice filled the house. Tola had spent hours preparing dinner, hoping it would please Kunle after his long day at work. Deji sat at the dining table, doodling quietly in his sketchpad. Kunle arrived, his brows furrowed as he loosened his tie. He sniffed the air and grunted. "What's that smell? Is the rice burnt?" Tola's hands tightened around the serving spoon. "No, it's just the spices. It's perfectly fine," she replied softly. Kunle sat down and took a bite, his face twisted in disgust. "You call this food? It's too salty." He pushed the plate away, the jollof spilling onto the table. "I'm sorry," Tola said, reaching for the plate. "I'll make something else." But Conley wasn't listening. He grabbed the plate and hurled it at the wall. The crash startled Deji, who dropped his pencil. Shards of ceramic flew everywhere, and the red sauce splattered onto the white walls. Tola's hands trembled as she knelt to pick up the broken pieces. Kunle stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath. Deji stayed frozen in his chair, his wide eyes fixed on his mother. That wasn't the only time Deji witnessed his father's rage. Another night, Deji woke to the sound of shouting. He tiptoed to the living room, peering through the slightly open door. Kunle was yelling at Tola, accusing her of losing an important document he'd misplaced himself. "How many times have I told you to leave my things alone?" Kunle shouted, slamming his hand on the coffee table. "I didn't touch it," Tola said, her voice shaking. "Maybe it's still in your bag." "Are you saying I'm careless?" Kunle retorted, stepping closer to her. Tola flinched, her hands instinctively rising to shield herself. Deji's heart pounded as he watched. He wanted to run in and protect his mother, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of his mother's fearful face haunting him. 15 years later, Deji was a quiet and withdrawn young man. He had grown into a tall and slender figure, his once curious eyes now clouded with an unspoken weight. His academic brilliance had earned him a place at one of Nigeria's most prestigious universities, where he studied engineering. On the surface, He was the perfect student, diligent, intelligent, and disciplined. Professors praised his work ethic, and peers admired his unwavering focus. But beneath his structured life, Deji struggled emotionally. His relationships were fleeting, and he avoided conflict at all costs. Any raised voice or harsh tone made him feel like the scared boy hiding in the hallway. He was well liked but distant, always keeping people at arm's length, afraid of getting too close. He buried himself in his studies, excelling academically while ignoring the emotional wounds that had never truly healed. Deji's girlfriend, Amaka, was the first to notice. She loved his calm demeanor but grew frustrated with his tendency to walk away whenever they had disagreements. Deji, why do you always shut down when we argue? Amaka asked one evening, after he left her apartment mid-conversation. Deji looked away, his hands fidgeting. I don't like fights. No one does, Amaka replied. But relationships require communication. Walking away doesn't solve anything. Deji hesitated. It's not that simple. Arguments remind me of things I don't want to think about. Amaka's tone softened. What things? Deji took a deep breath. My parents, my dad, he wasn't a kind man. I saw things I shouldn't have seen. Encouraged by Amaka, Deji began therapy. He spoke about the broken plates, the shouting, and his mother's trembling hands. Slowly, he realized how much those memories had shaped his fears and avoidance. One session stood out. Your father's actions weren't your fault, the therapist said gently, but it's your choice to break the cycle. One afternoon, Deji decided to visit his parents. While Kunle was out, he sat with Tola in the kitchen. Mom, can we talk? He began, his voice steady but nervous. Tola looked up from peeling yams. Of course, my dear. I, I remember everything, Deji said. The shouting, the plates, the fear. Dad could have hurt you. He could have killed you. Tola's hands stilled. Tears welled in her eyes. I stayed because I thought it was the right thing to do. I wanted to keep the family together. But at what cost? Deji asked, his voice breaking. You're alive, and I'm grateful for that. But it's better to leave a toxic relationship than to stay and hope things change. Tola wiped her tears. You're right. I see that now. Deji reached for her hand. I promise I'll never be like him. I'll be kind, patient, and loving to my partner because we all deserve the best. Just as Deji finished speaking, Kunle walked in. The room fell silent. Deji stood up, facing his father. Dad, I need to talk to you too. Kunle frowned but sat down. Deji took a deep breath. Your anger, your violence, it changed me. I've spent my whole life afraid of becoming you. I need you to know that. Kunle looked away, ashamed. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he muttered. But you did, Deji said, and I refuse to be like you. Kunle's shoulders slumped, realization dawning. Tola reached for Deji's hand, a silent thank you in her eyes. Deji's words gave Tola strength. She began attending a local women's group where she met others who had endured similar struggles. Sharing her story and hearing others gave her a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time, she considered a life beyond the walls of her marriage. Moral of the story: your actions ripple into the lives of others. The choices you make, especially in moments of anger, can leave lasting impressions on those around you. But it's never too late to change, heal, and choose love over fear. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more moving tales. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can inspire change. The end.